Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Heart of America. Today, we have a special treat. I have a guest host for today who may become a regular host. We're going to give it a shot and see. This is Alvin Dawkins. And I met Alvin through a really good friend of ours, Juliana Mir-Shahzad, who had graduated from the University of Santa Monica spiritual psychology, I believe, master's program. Is that right, Alvin?
Yes, that is right. Yeah.
Okay. And he's just become someone that is sort of one of my go-tos for when the news comes out and I'm like, what the heck is going on? I call Alvin or I text Alvin and he gives me some perspective and then I share my perspective and maybe we calm down a little bit. I'm not sure, Alvin. What do you think?
Maybe, yeah, maybe no, not so much.
Sometimes it's the opposite, depending on what's going on. But it's just nice to kind of have a hand to hold. And I'm going to do this formal introduction for Alvin, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about, just what I see in him that I think is super important for the rest of the country to hear and understand and listen to from Alvin. So here we go with his official bio. With a passion for music since childhood, Alvin Dawkins is a jazz bassist, composer, songwriter, and recording artist. He is also a writer and author of the forthcoming book, From Prison to Purpose, a hero's journey memoir. From being born in prison, adopted, and growing up in the ugliness of Alabama's Jim Crow segregation and apartheid, in the heart and center also of the 1960s civil rights movement for voting, civil and human rights, from struggling with lifelong, severe, at times debilitating depression, and ultimately leading to a series of powerful spiritual experiences. How interesting. I'd love to hear about that too. And which also led to a complete reorientation, relationship to, and better understanding of depression. I've been through that too, Alvin, actually.
Wow.
Yeah, we could talk about that on another show. Yeah,
love to.
Yeah, let's do that. Inspired and informed by these life experiences, in addition to a master's degree in spiritual psychology from the University of Santa Monica, Alvin is drawn towards enlightening and honest conversations around unconscious bias, white privilege, and racism, and how these often shape and inform many white spiritual communities. And in fact, that was sort of how I really got to know Alvin, as we were both on a program with Rohini Ross, who is a three principles practitioner, very well known globally. And Julianne together had put together a program called Reimagining Our Spiritual Communities, in which we were trying to present it within the context of the explosion of the Black Lives Matter movement, sort of what sort of racial education and racial understanding. And that was, not without its bumps in the road and so on and so forth. But what I really appreciate, but it was also really enlightening for maybe 100 or so people joined us on that program. And I thought that was great. And I thought that this kind of program is so important. And what struck me about Alvin is that, and this is what I think a lot of white people in this country don't understand, particularly those that are very upset about teaching critical race theory in schools and learning our history, which includes racism and slavery and indigenous genocide and everything else, is how much compassion, and I don't know if forgiveness is the right word, Alvin, but that Black authors and speakers like yourself, people who grew up in the Deep South, and have written about the most awful things. I'm thinking of the book Caste by Isabel Wilkerson, and The Sum of Us as well. I think by Heather McGhee. These are Black women. There is so much, it's just their arms are wide open to white people, actually, is my impression. Do you want to just speak to that? Because that's what I feel from you as well. Is that something you can speak to briefly?
Yeah, and thank you for having me on and inviting me today.
Yeah.
I would agree with that in large measure. I would say that's been historically, if you will, what's informed the civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s and forward.
Yeah.
Is this spirit of compassion, openness, and redemption.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the spirit of welcoming and inviting, wanting to address head on, if you will, the issues that we're confronting, racism, all of that, and at the same time with the spirit of love, not a sentimental, flowery kind of love, but a powerful, radical kind of love, the radical enough that it makes for change, substantive change. Yeah.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about Larry Elder today. He has a unique perspective on race issues. He was the one who just was defeated by Gavin Newsom in his effort to, in the California effort to recall Newsom, Gavin Newsom, the governor of California. And excuse me, pardon me. I just want to mention these are conversations that I think we should get into over the coming weeks, that I have heard Indigenous people say, we just had a mission bell removal ceremony here in California that was led by the Amamutsun tribal band, which is our local Indian or California Indigenous sort of, people. They're still here and they're getting rid of the mission bells, which is controversial. But one of them said, and I thought it was interesting, he said, when he was speaking, I don't understand why there's so much resistance. Oh, it was a woman. And she said, are they afraid that we're going to do the same thing to them? And I've heard that from Black people too. Like, why is there so much resistance to just looking at the past or allowing for Black power or Indigenous power or Asian power? But particularly, I think Black and Indigenous, because that's where I see the most harm and violence and oppression have happened here. I think there is a sort of a fear of retaliation, a sense of guilt, perhaps. Is that something you see?
Yeah, I tend to think that it's a bit of both, probably a bit more fear maybe than shame. But I think they're complementary. That there's the fear that there's going to be the retaliation in kind, justified or not. I don't encounter in my conversations, and my life experience has not been being involved in the movement that there's been any energy towards wanting to retaliate. Like I said, this has all been based in compassion and opening the tent. We're wanting human and civil rights for everybody.
Right.
So that to grant full human and civil rights to Black and brown people and Indigenous people and gays and lesbians doesn't exclude anyone.
Right.
It's not an exclusion of anyone. It's
right.
inclusive of everyone.
Right. And that's the energy I feel. Go ahead. You keep going.
And at the same time, I feel that there's also the shame and the guilt of it, that there's something in the collective psyche of this country that doesn't want to face, that doesn't want to confront the reality of what's happened over these centuries.
Yeah.
You just don't want to look at it.
Yeah. That is, we could go on a deep dive in terms of that conversation. I just want to mention that I've been involved in several book groups, and I'm in my church's diversity and inclusion group now. And I have heard white people share it very honestly, from a very raw space. Like, I am so ashamed, and I'm not, shame is something that's fine. It's a human emotion, and it might be an appropriate emotion, but I'm not sure it's a place that we need to get stuck in either. And I think for people like Larry Elder and other, let's say, white people who are very resistant, there may be a kernel of truth there that we don't want to live in shame, right? Like, that's not a healthy place to be. Right. But there's a denialism happening too. And so this is great stuff. So let's go to the recall. What do you say? And then maybe we can circle back to this conversation. It
Sure.
might play
in.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Alvin, you've been watching California carefully. The rest of the nation has as well, because this challenge to one of our biggest states, I think California is actually bigger than Texas, Texas being just behind California as the second biggest state. It's very meaningful when there is a Republican-led, and it was predominantly Republican-led. Clearly, the Democrats didn't lead this recall against Newsom, and it wasn't really independents either. It was people who were, initially, I think it started way back just as a a recall effort that like similar to the one that happened for our other governor,
Gray Davis.
Gray Davis. But then with the coronavirus, it picked up steam because,
Right.
Gavin Newsom made a very poor choice.
Not a good look.
I know, not a good look to going to the French Laundry in Napa, Maybe it was in San Francisco because there's one in San Francisco now. I don't remember. And not wearing a mask when everyone else was like putting on masks and freaking out about trying to get masks. And
That's right.
But anyway, but you're not in California, right?
I'm not in California. I'm in Alabama caring for my elderly mom.
Right. So, but as you're watching, why was this of interest?
But my heart is in California.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, right. In San Francisco. No, I don't know. We don't want to be too liberal. Damn commies in San Francisco.
That's right, man.
So yeah, go ahead and why do you think this was nationally tracked and important? What is your analysis of that?
Well,
what do you care about?
For some of the reasons that you've just indicated, that California is the largest state in the country. I mean, there's 40 plus million people in the state of California, Texas being the second. But so much is and was riding on this recall, because it not only did California stand the chance of losing Governor Newsom, but that if Larry Elder had replaced him, it could have meant so much for the national landscape, because senator race, because we're looking at a potential retirement for Senator Feinstein, and I mean we've got that balance in the Senate right now with Vice President Kamala Harris being the tie-breaking vote in the Senate. Right. So the Democrats in Washington can't stand to lose one seat. So much is was riding on the recall.
Yeah. And I just want to give a shout out to our viewers and listeners. You may not be a Democrat. I don't even identify as a Democrat. I'm probably more of an independent, because I try to be critical of all politicians, whether they're Democratic or whether they're Republican. But I think Alvin and I both are pushing for the Dems right now, and we'll explain why. But in this show, we also want to acknowledge the concerns of people who consider themselves to be either Trump supporters or more moderate GOP folks, because we believe that we need to have dialogue and try to understand one another. Alvin, just so you know, I made a comment on a Facebook page for some very conservative talk show. I want to say Glenn Beck or something like that. I don't know if that's right. He's very right. He's hard right. And he's very critical of the Dems, demonizes the Dems. And there was a video, and I posted something like, well, how is it helpful to demonize the Democrats so much? Like we're just pulling this country apart, and I'm not sure how this is leading to solutions. I just made a comment that was kind of neutral. I wasn't like, this guy sucks and this guy's an a-hole.
Not like you might have felt like.
I was toning it down. I was trying to appeal to people's entire interests, Yeah. And higher, what is that the right word? Higher interest, higher better nature. Vibrations.
The better angels of our nature.
The better angels of our natures. And this guy comes back at me and he's like, I understand that you feel tired of all this. And I was like, oh, this guy's cool. He's gonna have a dialogue with me, which is something I try to do on social media, whether that's insane or not, or productive or not. I don't know, but I do try to do it. And this guy starts off reasonably, and then he goes into, pretty soon when the Civil War starts, you're going to experience the rage that's been pent up for so long. And when we are bashing your skulls in, you will not have expected or, be ready for the Civil War and blah, 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 blah. And this is where we're at in this country. Now, I'm hoping this is a small minority, but this is the same kind of postings and language that we saw in Parler before the Capitol riot and the insurrection. I'm going to call it an insurrection because that was the intent.
That's what it was.
But that doesn't, what's so weird is that I'm, as a liberal person, I think liberal people try to see other people's points of view, right? We try to be compassionate. And then I can sometimes see that given the way these people are thinking, this guy was thinking, what he thinks about critical race theory, what he thinks about that maybe BLM is Marxist, or, it feels like sometimes we're thinking the same things about each other in terms of they're trying to get us,
That's right.
But anyway, I'm digressing, but do you have any comments on that?
Oh, well, there's a lot there. Yeah, for me, Amy, it's, I guess, one of my goals, if it's possible, I'm not sure sometimes that it is, but I try. I continue to try.
Give it a try.
Because I'm in Alabama.
Yes, sister. You are.
Yeah.
You are.
But to try to engage and try to find a place of common ground, a place of meeting, because I'm thinking, okay, surely you love something, right?
Yeah.
I hear and I feel the anger. I know what it is that I think I know what it is that you're angry about, and that apparently you're angry at me for some reason or reasons. But beyond that, what is it that you care about? What is it that you love? Because I'd like to believe that we both love the country. We both love what we have here in this experiment in democracy. I want to believe that. And if we can find a rallying point around that, then let's start there and then build from there. But as long as we're pointing and yelling and shouting at each other and calling each other, a demon seed,
what? I'm not demon seed. What?
Where can that go?
Yeah, exactly. I was just writing about that on Medium. Well, one of the things he said was the left hates America.
See?
And I kind of got it. I thought, from his perspective, it looks like we hate America because we're so critical of the past, and we don't talk as much about it is so great that we have freedom of speech. I think it's great that we have freedom of speech. And of course, that even questioning the founding fathers like Thomas Jefferson, who was a slave owner. Like, I've been to DC, and I've been into the huge memorial to Jefferson, the rotunda it's an outdoor rotunda with all the quotes, and they're beautiful quotes. I mean, and I've been moved, and then right down the way is the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial, which I've also visited. And so I want to just celebrate Thomas Jefferson, but then it's like, okay, but then there's this darker part of him. This
other piece.
Yeah. So how do we, I think what we're grappling with is, how do we celebrate what I've just heard someone talking about? I can't remember who, an analyst on TV was saying, the equality of human beings that the Constitution put forward, even though it wasn't reality, but the idea of it was sort of in there somewhere, know?
Yeah.
And so that's something maybe we can say, hey, we resonate with that idea, right? I don't know. Thoughts?
I was going to say something there and I just lost that. But yeah, again, there has to be some point of rallying, commonality that we have to be able to reach in order to start a conversation and start a dialogue. I think, Amy, there needs to be a reset, like a total reset, because so much has happened, so much has gone on for 300, 400 plus years.
Yeah.
And that there needs to be a period of mourning, if you will, lamenting, sitting in the shame and the guilt, but like you said earlier, not camping out there, not living there permanently. But I think that before we can get to the place of forgiveness, because I think sometimes, and I see this in some spiritual circles, that we want to move rapidly to forgiveness and moving past. It's like, well, yeah, that's great, but there's something that has to be confronted and dealt with here. There's a lot that's happened that we can't just ignore that.
Right. I a lot of times the metaphor for me is child abuse. Like, if you have it's not that, I don't want to equate Black people and people of color to children. That's not, but
No.
the abuse, and when it's so terrible for so long, and then you get to be an adult and you're like, hey, you abused me, let's talk about that. And then the parent or the adult or whoever it was who was responsible for that abuse says, no, I didn't. No, I didn't. It wasn't that bad,
Right. Or it didn't happen.
It didn't happen, or let's just move on, or why are we talking about this? And frankly, that happens in interpersonal family relationships. And, it does happen that people get gaslit. So I think that there's actually on the one hand, a responsibility or a capacity on the part of people of color, including Black people, Indigenous and Asian people like myself, to say, okay, well, we still, and this is what spirituality, I think, can give us and gives us, is it doesn't mean we can't heal on our own. It doesn't mean we don't have the total capacity to be whole without that acknowledgement. But with that acknowledgement, for white people, it's like your responsibility is actually to be able to face this.
Yeah.
And this is the white half of me, and to be able to say, you know what, we can face it because we're bigger than it.
Yeah. We can be whole and at the same time confront and talk about these things, because the truth of the matter is that I am whole.
Yes.
You are whole.
Yes.
You are fundamentally whole in your essence, in your being.
Thank you, Alvin.
You're welcome, Amy. and it's coming from that awareness, coming from that knowing, and at the same time, because for me, it's both and. It's not either or. It's both and. It's me coming from the place of my wholeness that says, this is what allows me to then look at these things with a heart of compassion.
Yeah.
And that these things need to be addressed, because if we're going to move forward as a people, as a nation, a diverse nation of various races, ethnicities,
right,
gender identifications, etc., we can't pretend that these things didn't happen, because these things are still happening. It's not
right,
like those things no longer happen. They're
right,
in a context of history, and there's still reality today in 2021. I mean, we're having a J6 thing here on the Capitol this weekend.
Right. The
for
18th,
instance.
the 18th. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. We'll see what happens there. Yeah. Yeah, that's not fun to think about, but this is huge what you're saying, because I think what's happening is that there are truly racist people in this country, and they won't run around saying that, but they think it in their hearts. And it's something, I don't know why they still think this way, but they do. It's probably related to their own feelings of self-worth, and I'll feel better if, or maybe shame. I don't want to admit that there's all this racism in our past. And so maybe if we just stay racist, rather than, then we don't have to deal, we'll just take this line of thinking all the way. Right. And just dig our heels in. Okay. I'm losing my train of thought here, but this is really important. But I think that there are a lot of US Americans, and I'm using that term because we have Canada that's American and Latin America.
And Central and South America.
Yeah, I'm trying to be more correct and accurate about US Americans who actually don't think that they're racist and don't think that there is racism. And that's where we hear, oh, Biden is actually bringing up racism. I had a friend say this to me, we're more racist now because of Biden. And they think that talking about racism is the problem, and that we start thinking about it. And so this whole section, which I think is actually a bigger part of the population than those who are actually clearly racist, and know that within themselves. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's racism in everyone, I think, just because we all have bias and conditioning and everything else. But I think most US Americans, white US Americans, would say, well, I'm not racist. And I do support the civil rights movement. And now let's just get over this. And why do we keep talking about it? And that's where Larry Elder comes in, I think, because I think he plays to that mindset, that way of thinking. And so let's go to Larry Elder now, if that's okay. Or do you want to say something first?
No, that's fine. And I agree with that, because for me, it seems that Larry Elder serves as what you might call the thread of a good example, because here's a Black man,
Yeah.
and that for white people, quote unquote, he's an example. He can serve as proof. See, we're not a racist country. We've got a Black man running for the state of California, running for governor of California.
Right.
You know, and Obama, to some extent, served a similar kind of purpose. How can America be racist when we've just elected a Black man to the White House?
Right. Well, not everybody elected him, but okay.
Yeah.
And then what we saw was this white lash that I didn't even understand until Trump got elected. And we started to see swastikas all over the place, and Heil Trumps, from Richard Spencer.
We never would have gotten a Trump had there not been an Obama.
Right.
Had there not been a President Obama, this country never would have elected the likes of a Donald Trump. I was going to say we saw a similar sort of thing with Obama as well, that Obama was accused of being racist for talking about these things. That why are we talking about these things? We've moved past that now.
Right.
You're racist for bringing it up.
Right. Well, I'm just going to mention, for people who haven't seen the documentary from ABC called Homegrown Hate, you must watch this documentary, because it tracks the white supremacy movement through the bombing of the Oklahoma federal building, for example, all the way through until today, and what's been happening. And this is something a lot of Americans aren't paying attention to. But of course, Black Americans, Asian Americans, some of us, and other people of color are paying attention to, because, obviously it affects us. Our lives are on the line because of this kind of thinking. So that's where I think white America gets into ignorance. White US America gets into ignorance, is like, well, because we don't see it, it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And that's the piece that I think where we really need to push for more education around. Actually, there are a lot of white people in this country who are still very racist, to the point of violence, which is what we saw at the Capitol, and what we saw at the El Paso Walmart shooting, and what we saw in New Zealand at the mosque massacre, and all those people either referenced Trump, of course, the insurrection referenced Trump, or his ideologies, right, at the border, yes, for example. So that's important for white people who think that they're good people, who probably are good people to some extent, to start to understand. Now, Larry Elder, I think what was so crucial about the recall is, within the context of Trumpism that we've seen, and the idea of election fraud, and the idea that a Republican could come into a heavily Democratic state, or be in a heavily Democratic state, and try to overthrow the democratically elected governor who campaigned, who we all had a chance to get to know through his campaign, through his being the mayor, through his being the lieutenant governor of the state, and just do it like that, like just gathering a bunch of signatures on petitions, right?
Right.
And a lot of this was heavily funded by Republicans. So, so this felt to me like something kind of dangerous. And it's happened in my city, where two of our most progressive candidates were the target of a recall that succeeded. And it was the same thing, where they gathered signatures. They would not let them finish out their terms. And one of them was, I could see him being sort of problematic in the way he spoke. He could be very confrontational. He was also incredibly bold and brilliant in his trying to bring forward solutions. He was way too much on the side of homeless people who are homeless for business-oriented people here. And so given some of the things he said to people, he's very brusque and can be very abrupt. He was recalled, but then this other progressive was recalled. And I'm like, well, why two of them then? I don't understand why Chris Crone, the other candidate, the other city council member, is being elected. And there was no answer to that. He laughed in a bad way at a meeting. And then we understood there was all this money from sort of housing interests behind the recall campaign. And I thought, this is so undemocratic. We elected these people. And now when the university students are out of school, people it's hard to get people to vote to begin with. And now you want to have the special election where people probably aren't going to get out of bed to go vote, or try to take time off of work to go vote, or get babysitting to go vote.
That's
You
right.
want to try to sneak this past us. That was what upset me.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, apparently in California, it's really easy the way it's structured to recall an elected official to start, because it only requires a certain number of signatures to get that ball rolling. And then once moneyed interests come in from other states and dark money and all of that, it kind of takes on a life of its own,
Yeah.
I was going to say, and I just lost it as well.
Notepad.
Note to self.
Yeah. Post-its.
I think most reasonable people, and I'm talking about Republicans now, I think most reasonable Republicans know, Amy, that there was no fraud in the last election. There just wasn't. It was the most safest, accurate election in our nation's history.
Yeah.
What it's done and what it's doing is it's just throwing so much noise into the atmosphere that it's causing confusion. So much confusion that even a number of Republican voters don't even bother to show up. They just said, well, why bother? Because it's all being rigged, because that's the messaging. That's what the intent is, so that, because at the end of the day, it seems to me that this is all just a naked grab for power. It's just a naked power grab. So they're taking advantage of this narrative around voter fraud to sweep in all of these draconian voter suppression laws in all of the states. I mean, it's going on in about 48 states.
Yeah.
Republican-led states.
Yeah, and they have enacted in 30 states legislation to restrict voting access. They'll say, oh, it's because of integrity and we want to have election integrity. But some of the things are no drive-in, no drive-through voting. Why not?
Right. Like in Harris County in Houston, Texas, they just got rid of 24-hour and drive-in voting. It's like, well, when you were voting in Harris County, Texas, you had to have your driver's license with you. That's one of the most secure forms of ID there is.
Right.
Why would you want to eliminate? And how does that eliminate? If you're wanting to do away with voter fraud, if you're wanting voting integrity, how does that serve that?
Right.
To get rid of drive-in voting?
Right.
Has nothing to do with that.
Right. So Larry Elder, interestingly, as a Black man, first he said he believed that Biden had won the election, although he says that was taken out of context. Then he got pressure from the GOP to not say that. And if he wanted, I think if he wanted to get Trump's endorsement, he had to question the integrity of the national election in 2020. So he started to do that. He said there were shenanigans. For people who have any questions, you can even go to the Heritage Foundation site, which is an incredibly conservative site. I was just looking at the Heritage Foundation, and they show if there is voting fraud, it's over the history of many years in the thousands. Okay. Given that we have how many hundreds of millions of people who live in this country and hundreds of millions of voters, about, I think, 200 million voters.
Yeah. Something like that.
It's just not a thing.
Yeah. Mathematically, it's insignificant.
It's insignificant. The Brennan, I just want to mention too, for folks who want to look into this, the Brennan Center for Justice has done a report called Debunking the Voter Fraud Myth. And they have a report called The Truth About Voter Fraud that's available online. And, a lot of nonprofit institutions and nonpartisan institutions and conservative institutions like Heritage Foundation have looked at voter fraud. I mean, it gets to the point where, okay, so they're all saying, actually, there's not really a lot of voter fraud. You had all of these suits that were taken by Giuliani and who was that Kraken woman?
Sidney Powell.
Yeah. To the courts in the different states, all the way up to the Supreme Court. And none of these courts, I think there was maybe one case where there was some incidents of fraud, but all of the stories that had come out about Sharpies, all of that was disproven.
Yeah.
So part of me is like, do you really believe that there's voter fraud, or is for the average voting Republican Trump supporter, or do you kind of know? And that's the question I do kind of know it's not true, but you're just running with it because you're so upset. And if that's the case, we need to figure out how to bring that upset down a
Well,
few notches.
I tend to think, Amy, that I'll just say the people on the street, just the regular citizen,
Right.
supporter, if you will, probably is tending towards believing that there was voter fraud, because that's just been in the atmosphere for so long. They probably really do believe that, especially if they're subscribing to ultra right-wing news sources, QAnon, that sort of thing. They probably really do believe that. Many more Republicans, I would say the Republican leadership, senators, the House, state officials, I think they know the truth. They're taking advantage of the situation. They're taking advantage of the situation for power grab.
Yeah. And that's because they're basically losing. The Republican Party has been losing its base over many years. The evangelical churches have been losing their membership as well. And so what I'm seeing is just this sort of reverting to very extreme positions, and even to the point of talking about civil war. And the fear that's been put into folks about what the Democrats are doing, the demon rats, the libtards. It's that's what scares me the most, having, really tracked QAnon and some of the other Heart of America videos. I talk in depth about QAnon. And it's really a dehumanizing, demonizing set of conspiracy theories that sort of when someone is a demon, devil worshiping, pedophile, child abuser, people want to take matters into their own hands. So I can see the vigilantism that's encouraged by these kinds of conspiracies, but it's not really a much darker shade of gray as you get into Fox News, opinion shows,
Sure.
Carlson.
Sure. Your Tucker Carlson's, Laura Ingram's, yeah.
And that's where I saw Larry Elder. Now to speak about Elder a little bit more, who lost the election, and thank God by such a huge margin.
Amen.
I think he was spurred trying to say, oh, there was fraud in a state that's like 70% Democratic for the most part. So he couldn't. I don't think he was going to go there. I think he would have gone there if it was a closer margin. What do you think?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think he was certainly, skirting up to the line, exactly as you were saying, to rally, to get Trump's support.
Right.
Because you've got to sing that, you've got to dance to that music.
Right. Right.
Because that base, that 20, 30 something percent, those are true believers, the Trump loyalists. And the Republican Party, the GOP, knows that. So that's why they're all in lockstep, dancing to that music. Larry Elder being part of that as well. He knew that if he was going to carry the day in California, he had to dance to that music, whether he actually believed that himself or not.
Well, and that's unfortunate, because I actually found an interview he did with Morty Safer from 60 Minutes.
Yeah, morally safer.
morally safer from years ago. And he was a young, radio show host at that time for an ABC radio station in LA. And let's look at the kernel of truth that Larry Elder offers. Okay, that he did offer, because I feel like at this point, he's actually maybe sold his soul a little bit, because I think he's a smart man. He's an attorney. He's had a lot of education. He's very proud of what he knows. But I think what I see in him, and also Candace Owen, if I'm saying that right, I think it's Owen. Is there an S, Owens? I think.
I'm not sure. I think that's right, though.
We can look it up. Candace Owen, I can see some kernel of truth in what they're saying, some piece of the puzzle that we need to try to bring into the national dialogue. But then there's a way that when they get then they get popular, and they're getting, spots on Fox News, and they're getting invited to speak, at the national level and globally at conferences, or we're being asked to run for governor, for Pete's sake, right? Of California, the largest state in the nation. I don't know. I feel like there's some compromising that goes on inside of people like Larry Elder. Certainly a lot of lies about the wildfire situation in California, saying that it's about mismanagement, when, I mean, management is good. We should manage the forest better, probably, right? But not
Sure.
even mentioning the climate crisis or the fact that half the state's forests are managed by the feds, right? And anyway, so what I want to say, what's the kernel of truth in Larry Elder? What I saw in him, and I want to hear what you have to say about this, was it was mixed. Part of it was, what I want to say is that if we want equality, we need to just be who we know we can be. I want Black people to be their best, and I want them to just sort of show the world that we can do it. And I could sense in him this sort of like, I feel empowered. He had an intact family that he came from, with very supportive parents, very hardworking and loving parents. And my sense is he looks out at like the ghetto, like the inner city, and he doesn't like how that paints Black people. And so he wants to almost just say, get it together, man. Like, you are making us look bad. In fact, that is what he says. That is what he says. You're making us look bad, and don't make excuses. Just get it together,
Yeah.
And so, I mean, there's a lot more to talk about with this, but in a way, I kind of felt that from Candace Owen when she was so upset about George Floyd. She was like, I don't want George Floyd to be a Black person, because George Floyd was doing drugs and George Floyd was this and that. And she kept mentioning that as a way, I think, of saying, is this a kernel of truth for you? Like, Black people have every right to also criticize and have high standards for themselves and other Black people.
Sure.
And I think that's missing a whole piece of what's going on, of course. But do you have any thoughts about Larry Elder or Candace Owen?
Yeah, I do. I'll just say that I think that tends to exist within an overall bubble in this country, that many, if not most, white people really don't know Black people well enough and substantive enough to see and respect the diversity within Black America.
Yeah.
That within Black America, we're liberal, we're progressive, we're conservative as well. But because many white people don't really know Black people, we tend to paint minorities, Black people in particular, with this broad brush. But I can agree with some elements of Elder's position, or Candace Owen, that speaks to personal responsibility, if you will. Personal accountability, things like getting a good education, doing well in school, the kind of things that we were all taught as kids by our parents: to be responsible, to be respectful, be self-reliant, if you will. And at the same time, for me, it's a pendulum swinging too far in either direction. At the same time, because we live in a country that really, really values individualism. And we tend to think that our success is solely ours, that if we've become successful, it was solely our efforts that garnered that success, when that's never true. That's right. All of our success, any of our success, is the result of many, many, many people, because we're all interconnected and we're interdependent. But America, the part of the mythos of America is that we're rugged individuals. So I make it or fail on my own. So Larry Elder or Candace Owen can look down on Black people, other Black people living in, dilapidated conditions, and judge that as, lazy, lack of, resolve, effort, whatever that is.
Right.
And there may be some of that. I'm not saying that doesn't exist. Obviously it does. There may be some of that, but that exists within a much larger construct in this country.
And it also exists for white people.
Exactly.
Don't say, oh, look at all these lazy white people on welfare.
Listen, I can take you to neighborhoods right here in my hometown, Alabama, some of the poorest white people there are.
Yeah.
And the only difference is our skin color.
Right.
The only difference, but educationally, economically, it's the same.
Yeah. Yeah. There was a memoir that was written about Appalachia and Kentucky, and it became a movie. I'm not remembering exactly what the name of it was at this time, but it was a young boy from Appalachia who ended up going to college and then on to military college, law school. And he kind of said, we're suffering and dealing with the same issues where people are on drugs, people are not pulling themselves up by their bootstraps. There are jobs available. They're not taking those jobs. And these are white people, poor white Appalachians. And so what do we want to, like, from a spiritual perspective? I mean, as someone who's done spiritually based community work, right? I think the piece we're missing is that there is intergenerational trauma. And it's great that Larry Elder had a great family that supported him and believed in him and loved him, but not everybody has that. And kids who grow up, here you have slavery not so long ago, right? And the internalized racism, and I can also speak for Chinese people, when we are perceived as other, perceived as not enough or not, or just other, most for Asians, and I think more for Blacks, less than. It is hard not to take that in and to live that out because the whole society is telling you that. So of course, going further back in the past, it's going to be more intense. And that can lead to, family dynamics that are not healthy, possibly abusive, whatever else, because when there's self-hatred, right, then you get all these negative behaviors and outcomes. And that's something that can be healed and can be fixed. I don't know. I don't think money reparations are going to fix that. I think money reparations will help heal the nation, and just put us on a more holistic, like we acknowledge our mistakes. That's a beautiful thing,
Yeah. Right.
And it may help a lot of families too, who are ready to use that money in a good way. But the deeper internalized racism, what do you have to say about that?
Well, again, for me, it's all of those things. It's both, right. And it's reparations and addressing the deeper generational, multi-generational traumatic messaging that's still carried forward, because you're right. If that's what you're confronted with on a daily basis, that if I would like to forget for a brief period that I'm a Black man, that I'm just a man, the world is not going to let me forget that. I'm going to be constant. Well, I'm going to be constantly reminded of that throughout my daily existence. When I get in my car and get pulled over by the police, for instance, I'm probably more than likely, based on experience and the experience of family, my dad, my brother, uncles, cousins, have a different outcome, a different interaction with that white police officer. Now, that's not always the case. In fairness, I've had encounters with wonderful white police officers, but just as much, I've had enough negative encounters with the police to know that I'm treated and seen differently just because of the color of my skin.
Yeah.
And no white person in America has to live that way, Yeah.
And, even progressive white people that I know that I just had conversations with are saying, when I see Black people, these are progressive, I want to be an anti-racist. I want equity. I want to work for that. I'm going to dedicate a part of my life to that. I mean, I heard at least 2 people, if not 3 people, say just recently, I don't know how to be around Black people. I want to, sometimes I'm overly polite. There's just all this thinking, Yeah. Like I don't want to hurt that. I'm so polite that it's probably weird,
Gonna say something wrong or.
Yeah, exactly. So there's this is the piece we need to get past somehow. And my only offering was, I know that feeling from when I was younger and I was dealing with all these thoughts. And the best thing for me has been just to deepen my friendships with Black people so that I just am connected.
Yeah.
Because we all want to be human beings. I mean, we are human beings, but we also want authenticity, right? And I think that some of the backlash to Black Lives Matter and activism around people of color and wokeness and critical race theory has to do with white people feeling like I'm going to have to behave a certain way. I'm going to have a rule book.
Yeah. And maybe also thinking that I'm wrong as a white person. I've done something wrong. I've said something wrong. Your movement, the Black Lives Matter movement, says to me that there's something fundamentally wrong with me as a white person.
Right.
You know, I've done something wrong. I've said something wrong. Yeah.
My family, my grandfather, my grandmother, my greats, you know.
Right.
And so I think that spirituality then comes in a really beautiful way to be able to say, you know, you are way more than your race. You know, it's true that we don't have to see skin color, but we can't say that when so many people still do see skin color and are being racist and being politically motivated by race, you know, as a Trump, or for example. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I don't know that we're anywhere near the place where we've not arrived to the place as a country where we can be race neutral, if you will, where we don't see race. The reality is, you and I both know experientially that yes, we are so much more than my race or my gender, all of that. And it's from that place where, you know, the conversation has to be informed. It's coming from that reality.
Yes.
Yeah. And at the same time, it's having to bring these conversations along. It's like a trajectory. It's bringing it along. Before I can bring you to the place where we see that we're all one, for instance, that there is no difference between you and I. You know, yes, we look different, but it's like the different colored flowers in a field where the flowers they're not fighting against each other. You know, a yellow flower is fighting against a pink flower kind of thing. You know, one superior to the other. I mean, that's right. You know, ridiculous. But we're not there yet.
No,
we're not there yet.
No, because no. Go ahead.
Yeah, because all of our structures in this country and in the world are built around racial hierarchy. So if, in spite of the fact that race is an artificial construct, everything that it's created is real. Does that make sense?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think in the past, I wasn't sure what systemic racism was and what institutional racism was, because I see institutions as being made up of people. And I think white people would say, well, but there's just people. So if you don't have racist people in those institutions, and please add on to what I'm saying, I have since learned that, for instance, the Homestead Acts gave so much land to white people. And even the 40 acres and a mule, which was vaguely in my mind is, oh, did we do that? I don't know. I think we did that for Black people, right? But that never happened. They got the 40 acres for a little while, then it was taken away. The whole
that happened for like a week.
The whole Reconstruction was like interrupted.
Yeah.
And the racists in the South were welcomed back into the government and into positions of power, which is why we see the Confederate statues instead of the North one. We are now anti-slavery, and so we want to lift. There was an effort to do that, but then it got completely decimated. And you know, then you have the Black codes, and you have mass incarceration, and all these are all things that white people need to understand. That white people have gotten so much benefit from the GI Bills and the Homestead Acts that increase their wealth, right, you know, at the expense of or at the exclusion of people of color.
That's right.
Most people of color, actually, and particularly Black people.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely all true.
Yeah. And so that's the piece that if we don't look at that, as Larry Elder's not looking at that, he's not talking about it. This is my problem with Larry Elder is, at this point, I mean, I see the kernel of truth in what you're saying, but at this point, you are now giving fuel to the white supremacists in this country who support Trump. And that's not every Trump supporter is a white supremacist.
No.
But every white supremacist is a Trump supporter.
Seems to be.
Yeah. Unfortunate.
And, I think, Amy, there's a bit of political opportunism that happens with that too, with the Larry Elders and
Yeah.
the Candace Owens of the world.
Yeah.
They see where they can be successful, if you
Yes.
will,
Yes.
by, toting water.
Yeah. And then at a certain point, you just have to not listen to the quote unquote liberal side, because if you do, then you're going to start feeling conflicted.
You're going to feel conflicted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, so we've been all over the place in this conversation.
We've been over the map. Yeah.
And so I think we should wait on voting rights, and we could possibly do that next week, or we do need to talk about voting rights. And what's happening in this country to voting. We did touch on it a little bit. And I would just say, if there's some points of action, well, first of all, good news. Gavin Newsom won the recall by a landslide. And this to me was hopeful, because it showed that the Democrats are still energized around defeating Trumpism. That's how I saw it. And maybe not enough Republicans are on board with Trumpism to get worked up and jazzed up to get out there. I think a lot of Republicans are probably feeling a little bit queasy, I hope. Yeah.
I hope.
I mean, 40% of them believe Biden won. So what do they think about? And 60% don't believe Biden won in 2020. That's scary. But what
I think the number's a little different now. I think it's like 78% of Republicans don't believe Biden won.
Really?
Yeah. Latest number I saw, it's in the 70%.
Oh, that's unfortunate. That's unfortunate.
Yeah, it is. But I agree with you. Newsom having won the recall speaks to a larger thing about the progressive Democratic movement nationally. I hope that carries on to the midterms and to
me too
2024.
Well, because also the midterms usually flip against the presidency and the party in power in the White House. Right. But in this case, I think we're in special circumstances. I don't know if that's going to happen. Even if with these voter restrictions that are being passed, if we don't do something in Congress, which I hope we do, and we'll talk about that in the next show. Yeah. But we will activate, I think, because I never saw so much activation around the election as I did in 2020 with Biden Trump. I mean, I activated, you activated.
Yeah, you are so right. I mean, what happened in Georgia, for instance, and I think that if I can say that, it scared the shit out of Republicans for a Democratic president to carry the state of Georgia, and for Georgia to send 2 Democratic senators to the White House, to Washington, one Jewish person and a black man.
Right.
I mean, when has that ever happened?
Right. All hell's breaking loose now.
All hell's breaking loose. If this can happen in the South, in the deep South,
I know.
If this can happen in Georgia, this can happen in Mississippi and Arkansas and Alabama. But you're right. So many black people, especially black women, Stacey Abrams. Yeah. So many black women got energized and mobilized, and they turned out. And I completely agree with you. I really want to believe that in 2022, I think a lot of people, they see what's happening in these state houses all over the country. They see what's happening with the fake fraud stuff and the suppression and all of that. And they're deciding that however difficult it's going to be to vote, I'm going to vote.
I'm going to vote, and I'm going to call other people to vote.
Yeah.
And that's what I did for the first time, actually, in 2020. I figured out, oh, you can volunteer. So for people who are watching this, you need to be engaged. We've got, races in Virginia that are already happening that need our support. People's Action is one place to go, and they're wonderful because they do deep listening canvassing, where they will deep listen to Trump supporters and Republicans and try to find that common ground. So, and they've just teamed up with Sunrise to work on climate. It's People's Action has been amazing. Swing Left is another organization that's excellent at mobilizing volunteers to get out the vote and to canvass. And Civil Squared is a wonderful organization that tries to bring people together. Living room. I'm saying all this for our listeners, and we're going to wrap it up. But can you stay on for just a minute after we stop? Okay, super cool. Did you want to say anything else? Because I just wanted to give some action. Like, we need to get engaged, folks. We have a real threat on our hands. Donald Trump is probably going to run, I think, in 2024. And
If he doesn't get indicted or convicted on a number of these different charges, then yeah, he's very likely to run again.
he's going to run.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think so. We'll
Yeah.
track
So
that.
we need to get engaged. We need to get involved.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And Trumpism is, even without Trump, we can't have Republicans questioning our elections just because they don't like the outcomes.
That's right.
That's called the death of democracy. That's what
That's
it's called. We need
Right.
more democracy and not less democracy. So thank you so much, Alvin, for joining me today. And we'll see you all on the flip side. Last
Thank
thought.
you so much, Amy.
Oh, thank you. Okay, here we're going to say goodbye now, and goodbye, everybody.